They have teams of, almost 100 people that all they do is kind of look at these bill of ladings every single day for, 10 plus hours a day. How do we take this thing that was a cost center and now turn it into a revenue driver? And so we've been working with them on saying, hey, today it takes us a week to process bill of ladings, and that's really how we unlock and release the payments to our shippers and our clients and our carriers. If we can do that in 3 seconds instead of a week now, and we can get everyone paid faster, what can we now do with that better cash flow, better payment structure?
Hey, I'm Oscar. This is Tech for Supply Chains, and this is your front row seat to the people, ideas, and technologies that are making the world move. So if you're enjoying this series, please like and subscribe, and thank you so much for being here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tech for Supply Chains. And today we're focusing on a new technology that's tackling a problem that's as old as business itself: paperwork and documentation. So in supply chain in particular, a bunch of key processes rely on documents. And for a single product to reach a consumer's hands, tens of documents have to be exchanged between parties. So from a purchase order to a customs filing to a bill of lading and more. And today, our guest, Kushal Byatnal, will walk us through how new technology is transforming documents and how companies can unlock the real value hidden in them. So, Kushal, welcome.
Thanks, Oscar. It's so good to be here, and thank you for the intro.
Of course. Yeah. Why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself? So you're CEO and founder of Extend. And why don't you tell us a bit more about what is Extend and how did it start?
Yeah, it's a great question. My name is Kushal, CEO, co-founder of Extend. And at Extend, we are building a modern document processing cloud. So we want to give companies that work in industries where there's just so much PDFs and documents and Excel files. So think, healthcare, financial services, logistics, and supply chain, of course, being one of the major ones here. We want to give all those companies the tools that they need to really build any sort of mission critical, accurate document processing that they need to. It's kind of crazy how much of the world runs on documents, how much of the global GDP of everyone is just powered by these, very unstructured, messy PDF files. It's a problem that's been around for forever, right? And there's been a lot of attempts of trying to solve this over the past many years. OCR is a common term that you probably heard thrown around, and OCR has been around for decades at this point, but people still spend so much time, energy, and money trying to review these documents, whether it is through automation, if you are lucky, but most likely it's just people and teams of people you have looking at these documents, right? And that's really why we decided to start Extend, is to solve that once and for all.
Amazing. I can definitely see how the world will change if Extend really achieves its goal, and particularly in supply chain and logistics. There's so many functions that will be benefited from that. So, Kushal, why don't you tell us a bit about some of your early days at Amazon, Google, Brex? So you've been working in very different industries over the years. So from warehouse robotics at Amazon to finance at Brex and then content creation in your previous startup. Which experiences led to the insight to start Extend?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say there were two foremost ones. So I come from a technical background and an engineering background. I previously worked on some NLP and AI at Google back in the day, and this was before LLMs and all that fun stuff. This was like 8 years ago, back when transformers and some of those key technologies were just getting up and running off the ground. And I spent about a year at Google and learned a ton, and the people were some of the smartest people I'd ever worked with. But the slow-moving, sort of corporate bureaucracy was not really the sort of environment that I wanted to be in. And so I left and took all that sort of NLP experience, went to a startup called Brex in the financial services space, and joined Brex back when it was, 15, 20-ish people in one of our early offices. And, over time, I got to see that company grow from, 20 to 700, 800. I think it's over 1,000 now. But I was early tech lead there and really got to help build out a lot of the 0 to 1 products that we ended up shipping. And that is actually where I first ran into this problem of document processing, because we were trying to build an expense management product, which meant that we wanted to let users upload receipts and invoices and all kinds of financial documents, and we would help automatically process them and build reimbursements and expense reporting and all those sort of features on top of it. And we were excited going in because we had this idea in our mind of all of these really powerful product features that we could build, to make it a really delightful experience for the users. And submitting expense reports is something everyone hates. I don't think anyone has really ever enjoyed that. And so we were excited to build a really clean product experience to solve that and abstract that away. And it turned out that before we could even do that, we ended up spending like 70-80% of our engineering resources and time on this problem of actually getting those clean data out of these documents when they were uploaded in the first place. And so we only had a little bit of 20-30% of our time that we could actually then spend on the end product experience, just because getting clean, accurate, reliable data, because this is at the end of the day financial documents we're processing, out of these documents was incredibly tough, right? And this was back in 2018. And the state of the art at the time was using traditional legacy OCR combined with a lot of manual like regex rules and heuristics and all these sort of techniques that were like playing whack-a-mole a little bit, trying to make it work for all the different formats and types of layouts and complex tables and handwriting and all these different ways that these documents could come in. And we just ended up spending so much of our time trying to do that. And that experience always kind of stuck with me in the back of my mind.
Was there a turning point in technology that allowed you to go from, all right, this is a problem, we have to use OCR and a bunch of other workarounds to get this going, to, all right, now I have a new technology that allows me to solve this in a better way?
100%. And, this is one of, I think, the first applications that you really see of large language models, is being able to understand these documents in the same way that a human can. And that opens up an entire universe of additional capabilities that you can really take. And, most of the people I talk to, they say, "Oh, are you going into these companies and like replacing what they use for existing document processing?" But actually, the answer is 90% of the use cases we see today, they literally could not have been done like 12 months ago in the world. And these are entirely new use cases, very complex documents that you can now finally do with large language models. The previous generations of this technology, people have probably seen you have to sit there and like point, click, annotate, draw boxes around the values you want to extract. And it takes you have to do that for like thousands and thousands of examples. But then anytime the layout changes, your accuracy takes a nosedive, right? Large language models have kind of changed that on its head, where there's no bounding boxes, point, click annotation. It's all based on the semantic understanding of the document, just like how humans do. And that makes them really resilient to all the different formats and layouts and all the different complexities that you probably get in these documents.
Right. So if a new document comes in, the system is smart enough to understand whether this is actually an invoice or this is a packing list. And that's where the user can simply type in a small instruction and then get the system, in this case, Extents technology, the LLM underlying Extents technology, to extract the information based on the context of that document, which wasn't possible before with OCR.
Exactly. And so you couldn't really do this sort of like very nuanced understanding and targeted data extraction from these documents with the LLMs. And yeah, that's not to say that LLMs are foolproof, right? They still have their own limitations. Nothing is going to be 100% accurate. I often tell folks, if anyone is selling you 100% accuracy, you should run the other way, because I don't know what they're trying to give you. But you can get very high accuracy very quickly, right? Often what we try to get our customers to is, hey, can we get you to 90-95% accuracy in just a few, short examples, a few hours, maybe a day or two, depending on your use case and your documents, and then improve it from there. And our job really at Extend is, how do we take these large language models that can do a lot of different things? They're like generalized intelligence, but make them work really, really well for this very specific use case around documents, and then give you all the tools for managing the accuracy and reliability. Because again, at the end of the day, this is very mission critical information for a lot of our customers. And so, inaccuracy rates, hallucinations, all these scary things that we kind of hear about, they can have pretty catastrophic impacts downstream, especially in, supply chain logistics. What if you accidentally mark a bill of lading as signed when it wasn't signed and you've released payment, right? This sort of different downstream impacts that can be pretty catastrophic. You can actually control them with a lot of good old fashioned software and tooling that you pair with the LLMs. And that's really what we focus on.
Kushal, if Extend's vision becomes a reality, how will the world and Extend's users' world look like in 5 years?
Yeah. If you look historically at the arc of technology, there's always been these like massive data sets that have unlocked a lot of value for the world, whether it was web data that you build search on top of, and then now you have search engines, or if it was mobile data. And one of the last remaining holdouts of like untapped data in the world is unstructured documents and data, right? And if we do our jobs correctly in 5, 10 years, there will be no difference between the way people think about unstructured data and structured data. And that has enormous implications for what people can do, not just in supply chain, but pretty much any industry where, what can we do now if no human ever has to look at a PDF again or do manual data entry again? What, new products can we build on top of data that we previously had no access to? Right? What can we start to automate away in those worlds? And so, if we can eliminate that distinction, and that's really what we're focused on here, is how do we build all the different, tools and infrastructure and software that ambitious companies need that are operating in these domains with unstructured data. And if we can eliminate that distinction and open up access to this untapped repository of data, we can tremendously change how the world really thinks. And there's so much value there just waiting to be unlocked.
That's super powerful. And I think just imagining a very specific use case that we can actually extract from documents and getting that into users' hands or making a more informed decision. For example, extract information out of a packing list or extract information out of an invoice and then providing you with the ability to understand what's in that document without necessarily having to open it, process it. That saves so much time that allows you to focus on higher leverage work, right?
100%. And it's also, not just, freeing up the team's time, but it's also enabling new experiences that you couldn't have done before. Where, what if you could give a customer real time validation when they upload a receipt or, a bill of lading in these ways that, like, if you had to have someone that spends 3 days before doing it, you can now give someone an answer in 3 seconds, right? And, that opens up all kinds of new opportunities too.
I want to double click on the technology trends and how they're transforming the industry. So today, AI is everywhere, right? We see it everywhere, making headlines and investment, and this new chat models that are improving. So they're redefining how companies read, write, and process information.
Mhm.
How do you envision the future of documents having said this? And how does AI play a role in that? Are we going to see a world in which documents still exist?
Mm,
Or do we see a world in which documents will be just data that's already structured, that's communicated between different agents? Like, how are you
yeah.
looking at that world in the future?
Yeah. That's a great question. So, long story short, I don't think documents are going anywhere. Specifically because if you think about like what a document is at the end of the day, it is like the universal API. It's an API where APIs don't exist. And previously, they used to be for human to human APIs. And today, maybe they're human to agent APIs. And in the future, it could be an agent to agent API. But all a document is just a representation of unstructured data in some format, right? And what I actually think is going to happen is as more data gets created, we're actually going to have more unstructured data in the world because the processing and ingesting of it is going to be automated, less so than the other way around, where people are going to spend a lot more time structuring that data up front, right? And that I think is one of the biggest unlocks that you do have with LLMs is people now don't need to spend a lot of time conforming data into specific schemas. You can leave it unstructured, and you can now satisfy that on both sides of the equation with LLMs or agents or whatever ends up being the case in 5 years from now, right? Um, and I think, the presence of documents, especially in some of these industries where it is just such a critical system of record for, patient data in healthcare or financial data and in any sort of financial system, those sorts of behaviors are very hard to change. And I'm not saying they won't change over time; they definitely will. But I don't think it's going anywhere, especially given the mission critical nature of it in like the next 10 years. After that, I do think the way that we interact with documents is going to be very different. But documents at the end of the day are just unstructured data, and that's not going anywhere.
I think that's a good take. We also use documents in the industry as a representation of something that has a meaning. So I'm
Right.
giving you a document that has to be processed and stamped or received and exchanged in order to do a representation of a of an interchange or an agreement, right? So I think that's also very powerful in the supply chain world. I'm wondering if you see any other big use cases in the supply chain space or in the logistics industry where documents will take uh, a different meaning or will have a different function than they currently have.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the really interesting things you can now do, and we've kind of seen this in a few different spaces, is revenue unlock from documents. It's something that people get very excited about. And for example, we just recently signed one of the largest 3PLs in the world, and we've been working with them now to automate a ton of different use cases they have. But one of the ones that are most excited about is actually, hey, how do we take this bill of lading document that was previously very much so a cost center and something that would actually like slow down payments to their customers, payments to their clients. It would take a ton of manual work. I think they have teams of, almost 100 people that all they do is kind of look at these bill of ladings every single day for, 10 plus hours a day. How do we take this thing that was a cost center and now turn it into a revenue driver? And so we've been working with them on saying, hey, today it takes us a week to process bill of ladings, and that's really how we unlock and release the payments to our shippers and our clients and our carriers. If we can do that in 3 seconds instead of a week now, and we can get everyone paid faster, what can we now do with that better cash flow, better payment structure? And so where I see people get really excited is it's actually not just like, can we save the money on the labor side, but actually can we turn it into a revenue driver? And I think the most exciting use cases of document processing are usually, can we make more money with it, or can we build a new product on top of it, which in effect gets happier customers, which make us more money, right? And I think that's where we see a lot of the activity happening and will continue to. That's probably 90% of it. You do have, the standard 10% of, hey, can we do some automation, replace some jobs, do things like that? But, counterintuitively, that ends up being the minority of the use cases we see.
That's super interesting because whenever you think about automating documents, you're thinking about how do I reduce the amount of people that have to do this work? But what you're saying, and which I think is super exciting, is yes, there's a fraction of that work that will become automated and then people will just have to manage exceptions. But then you will also have new use cases that you're unlocking, new revenue streams. You will have potentially new insights that you weren't even aware of, right? You
Yeah.
can do RAG, you can do better data processing from insights that are just hidden there and buried in the document. So I think that's exciting, and this will get the audience's brain uh, going. So
That's the goal.
thanks for sharing that. All right, I want to double click on extend and your technology and what makes it different. So traditional OCR was initially a breakthrough, as you said, but then it became a headache, right? You had to train it. It was slow to train. It was prone to errors, and extend is different. So you're using LLMs, you're using multi-model um, understanding, and you're also doing rapid iteration to raise document automation to a new level. So why don't you tell me a bit about why was traditional OCR broken and what's different about Extend's approach with LLMs?
Yeah. So the biggest issue with traditional OCR is you could never really, get really good results on very unstructured data. It would work decently maybe for structured and semi-structured data, like here's a W-2 form, right? Is the canonical example, and the W-2 format has not changed in like decades, right? Or if it has, it's like very minor changes, and each one kind of looks the same. Uh, that's great for that domain, but 99% of use cases in the world are unfortunately not like that, right? They are very messy data that can be different across, bill of ladings that have stamps that indicate, hey, this was received. And there might be coffee spills on it. There might be blurry images that people take with their phones of, driver receipts and all these sort of use cases where it's definitely not standard, right? And that's where it would really break down historically. And so what we really tried to do here at Extend is take the latest in large language models and multimodal understanding where we can recognize a document when it comes in regardless of if it's a PDF or an image, and if it's slanted or horizontal or upside down or coffee stains or a totally new format that we've never seen before. And we first apply a level of pre-processing techniques to it that really do a good job of recognizing the layout of the documents, cleaning up all the blurry visual artifacts, fixing rotation and skew and issues like that, understanding the handwriting that's in it, identifying, hey, this is a table here that's split across two pages. In the top right here, we actually have a seal and a stamp and a logo. Here's like an image that we also need to recognize. And so we do a lot of work in the pre-processing and context layer of cleaning up these documents. And then we pass them into a multi-step extraction process or a splitting process or document classification, kind of depending on what the use case is, to identify if it's classification. Hey, this is a bill of lading, this is a packing list, or this is a picture of a dog that someone somehow uploaded into the platform, right? And then we feed that into multi-step data extraction, which is often one of the more complex and interesting use cases where using LLMs, we can define these schemas in natural language. So no point click annotation, nothing like that. You simply describe it using natural language the same way you would to, for example, someone on your operations team. And the models will then go through and reason through it and try to extract that data. And the really powerful part about doing it this way is it's format and layout agnostic. So usually within just 5 to 10 examples, you can have a very robust system that is dealing with new layouts, new edge cases that it's never seen before. And you can do that in like 20 minutes in a way that previously would have taken you 6 months and a team of ML researchers to really go and tackle that problem, right? But we don't really stop just there because, how we get people the best accuracy as fast as possible is step one. But step two is how do we then help them deploy that confidently into production? Because this is mission critical data at the end of the day. And going to your CTO and saying, we're going to put LLMs and processing the most important information our company has and, cross our fingers and hope it goes well is typically not a recipe for success. And so there's a lot of tooling we provide around how do you actually evaluate these models and your configuration against maybe a larger sample set to see are there any edge cases that are breaking it? If so, why is that happening? And can we actually fix that? How do we actually build a lot of tooling around making it so we can detect exceptions in real time, whether it's by low confidence by the models, whether it's by validation rules that fail, and then actually route those exceptions to human of the loop tooling that we offer so that you can have a manual team that's making the last mile corrections and then building a system that can take those human corrections and improve it in real time. And that's how we can kind of build this feedback loop that gets from maybe 90% to then 95 to 98, 99% accuracy over time. And that's really how you end up unlocking the full value here. And that's where we go deep with our product.
That's very exciting because when you're trying to put this to practice and try to process all those documents, I think people are thinking about, all right, but ChatGPT can do this on my behalf, right? I'm just uploading this to ChatGPT and it can give me um, the structured data that I need. But when you're thinking about how to do this at a large scale and making it in a production environment where data has to be correct 100% of the time or almost, um, there are a lot of these edge cases and all of this scaffolding that people do not really take into account. And that's the part that Extend is solving, if I understand correctly. So you're not only changing the platform from a different technology, which is OCR to LLMs and multi-model um, extraction, but you're also doing all the scaffolding that allows the user to get to 100% or close to 100% accuracy with the different tools that you're giving, which is where it adds value on top of the traditional LLM layer, if I'm understanding correctly.
That's exactly right. There's the reason people buy us is very simple. It's twofold. One is, they end up getting the best accuracy that they see on their documents because of everything we do with the LLMs and the pre-processing. And then the second is we cut their timeline for deploying from months down to days because of all that scaffolding and tooling that we provide. And those two are often very compelling reasons for people to go with us.
Amazing. And I want to connect this to the customer results and real world impact that we really try to focus on here at Tech for Supply Chains, which is understanding how applying this technology or adopting whatever we're talking about helps you actually see real changes in your P&L, right? So whether it's in procurement, logistics, or import, export, or finance, can you share one or two stories or big wins of time savings or risk reductions that the technologies have helped enable?
Yeah, 100%. I'll share maybe one or two examples. One is a little bit unexpected, and then one might be a bit more traditional. So we're working with one of the largest real estate companies in America on a ton of different use cases. But one of the more interesting ones is mortgage automation, right? And this is something that historically has taken weeks. It's very painful. These are, if you've ever filled out a mortgage application, I have not. I live in New York City, so we can't afford to buy houses here, but maybe one day. But I've heard that these are very complex documents, right? And these are like 100+ page packages of information that previously had to get processed manually by humans. And the time frame that we're talking about is on the order of weeks to get through one of these mortgage applications. And the potential error rate of getting information wrong is very high. And I'm not saying AI is perfect, but humans are also not perfect, right? And so this company was seeing error rates from people that would obviously get tired or sleepy or hungry, or they would forget some very specific nuance in the data and the documents. And that's actually something that obviously LLMs, they have their own problems, but it's not those, right? If you tell a model once, hey, if you see this, do that, it doesn't forget it, right? It's not humans in that way. And so we were actually able to get them up and running on their use case, and at real time they're now processing and turning around mortgage applications on the order of minutes, not weeks or months anymore, with a significantly higher accuracy rate that they were seeing. And now their team again is enabled to just focus on the edge cases and the exceptions and do the downstream work of, great, we have this clean data from mortgages. What can we now use and do with that elsewhere, right? And so we get really excited about that use case. And there's a second one we've also seen where, with some of our healthcare customers, for example, Flatiron Health is a company that we've worked with. They have billions of pages of patient medical data. And for them, the biggest ROI ended up coming from how much engineering time we ended up saving them. They previously were building their own models in house, and I think they're the folks on the team that we worked with. They told us it took them about 6 to 9 months to build a model for one use case, and they were able to replicate that in Extend in the order of days to get the same level of performance. And then now they've since exceeded that level of performance. And so 9 months of engineering time that's saved and freed up for valuable, SWEs and NLP researchers that can now go do other things. Pretty impactful. And they've now been able to deploy Extend across multiple use cases at pretty, large scale.
That's very exciting. And it also just brings me back to how valuable it is to focus on your core, right? There are certain use cases where leveraging a partner that will focus on that specific part of the workflow and simply getting more repetitions at it will provide better results. So you can focus on your core, which is the actual differentiation that you want to provide to your customers, right? I'm sure the ROI of those engineers will be way higher since they'll be deployed somewhere where it's incremental to the business. Amazing. I want to move over to the adoption and best practices and implementation. So we see a lot of people wanting to implement AI in their supply chains or in specific parts of their processes. And this is where I think people need the most help from the people who are actually building the technology to get good results. So can you provide any advice for companies that are starting with document automation? What's the best way to test out and validate that this is something you need, that the ROI is there? How do you build a business case around it? And how do you ensure a smooth rollout?
Yeah, 100%. I think some of the things that we really try to look for ourselves are when you're looking at any new use case, right? Like you can automate a lot of things, but the juice has to be worth the squeeze at the end of the day. And if it's not, there's a ton of different applications you'd rather be focusing your time on. And so for us, what we really look at is, one, what is the volume of documents that you get? That's usually one of the most telltale signs. If you have 1,000 documents, for example, while you could automate it with AI, it's probably much cheaper, faster, and more efficient to just keep doing that manually, right? But as soon as you start to get to, hey, I get 10,000 documents a month, or I get, even more than that, that's when you should really start to look at bringing in some level of automation. Or if you get very high error rates, that's another area where it might make sense, right? So those are kind of the two things that we really try to look at. And then it's always thinking about, okay, what's the downstream impact, or where does that data go? Right. If this is data that it's not really mission critical, maybe it's just like, nice to have analytics, that probably impacts the ROI equation a little bit. But if you're going to take this data and power new product experiences on top of it, or offer something to your users that you couldn't have otherwise, that's where it becomes really exciting and it makes a ton of sense to go deep into. But I think often the trap that I see people fall into is assuming that this is going to be very easy to get up and running. And as much as I would like that to be true, and that's the product that we're trying to build to enable that to happen, it's not a one and done, and you're gonna build document automation in a couple days and then move on and never look back at it. Right? There's constant maintenance that's involved. There's ongoing fixes and edits. It isn't going to be 100% accurate, and anyone that tells you that is lying to you, quite frankly. I don't think we've ever seen anyone that's hit 100% accuracy. That's not to say that's not valuable, right? Like there's still a lot of value. It's not a binary thing, and even humans are not 100%, right? But if that's the expectation, then I think you might be setting yourself up for failure. So those are a few things to keep in mind.
I think that's great because whenever we talk about AI taking over, we think about, oh, nobody's gonna have a job anymore. And it seems like that's not really true, right? At least not in the foreseeable future, where humans will actually have to coordinate, they'll have to orchestrate the different flows that AI is doing on their behalf. So it feels like we're moving from a point where humans were doing the work to now humans have to manage the work, right? So AI is an additional worker that you have in your team, but there's still the human need to manage those workflows to make sure that we do the right ROI calculations, that we focus on getting the right people in the room, that we define the scope for that correctly. And from there, there will have to be a human that's making sure that the AI is performing. So I think that's a good takeaway from this one. The other point that I'd like to cover with you is in evaluations, right? So,
Yeah.
how are you guys thinking about eval sets and making sure that the LLM has something to compare against to
Mhm.
make it more efficient and more accurate out of the box versus a traditional model that has no context on your data?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head on like the most important part of actually any successful deployment. There's two things that are involved in it, right? At the end of the day, what you're really solving is a data and systems problem. And so when you think of it from that perspective, what do you need is you need the data and you need expertise about the data. And so those are the two things that are really the foundation of any successful eval. So on the first side around the data itself, if you don't have good representative data, and it doesn't need to be a billion examples. All you really need to get started is maybe a couple hundred, maybe a little bit more or less, depending on your use case. But you do need a sample set of good data to even validate and get off the ground, right? And then the second thing is expertise about that data. And so what we typically recommend is having someone on the technical AI side. Maybe it's an AI engineer, maybe it's a data scientist, a traditional software engineer, paired with a domain expert, right? So this could maybe be a non-technical operations person. It could be a product manager. It could be anyone that really understands the data really well, combined with someone who understands the technology really well. And if you take both of those people, you put them in a room with good data and you give them the tooling that they need, that is really what you need to go from 0 to 1 on any sort of new AI use case. And that's how we measure extend as well. One of the first things we built in our product was native integrated evals, not just because that's how you can measure the accuracy, but some of the really exciting stuff we're building now is how do we take eval sets and actually use that to teach the models directly, maybe put an agent on a loop that says, here's the goal data that we want to get to, go iterate in a loop for a few hours until you figure out how to do that with our documents, right? And so it unlocks just a ton of really exciting things you can do, but it all starts with having clean data in the first place.
Kushal, and how can executives define and measure success for document automation? Like, what are the right metrics to think about when you're doing that? Is it something that's connected to the documents themselves? Is it something that's downstream in their processes? Have you seen any successful examples that you can tell us about on what metrics people are focusing on and what are the ones that you're continuously monitoring to ensure that a successful rollout takes place?
Yeah, I think there's a few. The way you want to think about it is there's like two sort of metrics, right? One is like the ROI metric, and then you have uh, the leading indicator of that ROI. And these are two separate things, right? At the end of the day, like it doesn't matter how good your accuracy is, how good your classifier is working, how good your extractor is working, if it is not translating into downstream ROI, right? And so this could be a number of different things. We've heard a few companies call in supply chain space, I think straight through processing, right? STP rates. How many documents just go through without needing a single human to look at them? Because that is really what the business cares about. Or if you're building a new product experience on top of it, how many documents does a user have to correct because they're doing the final stage of validation in their product, right? So the downstream ROI metrics, I think, are probably the most important. But if you only rely on those, you're not going to really understand how to effectively make it go up or down, which is what matters. And so that's where a lot of leading indicators come into play of, hey, what is the performance of each individual step of your pipeline, right? What is the accuracy of your classifier? What is the accuracy of your extractor? But what we often find too is extend is not the only part of your pipeline. It's a big chunk of it, but there's going to be steps before it and steps after it. And you kind of have to end up measuring all of those. And it's, the rule of building any complex system like this is the end performance is going to be the minimum performance of all the steps that you have. And so having very granular tracking and metrics at each step of that, really understanding where the bottleneck is and how that's translating into your downstream ROI. I think if you don't understand all of those pieces, you're just going to be shooting in the dark.
Perfect. And if we can break this down, like everything we've discussed about implementation and how to make this successful to the audience, I think I can think of three primary buckets or pillars. One is having the right people. So, who's going to be paired with that subject matter expert, who's going to be involved and make sure that you have the right people there. Then you think about process, right? So, how are we going to evaluate the different parts of the flow? And I think it's a combination of process and metrics, right? So, in each part of the pipeline, what are we measuring, what are we evaluating against, and then comes technology, right? And it seems like it cannot act on a vacuum. It doesn't work only with one of those components. You actually need people, process, and technology. And I think the foundation of all of this is what you were mentioning at the beginning is the ROI, right? Having a very clear understanding of what are your business objectives and how this initiative will actually help you obtain them and come up with either a better product or reduce cost or simply reduce error rates, which are super expensive, particularly in the supply chain space.
Terrible.
All right. So let's get into practical advice for the supply chain leaders. How can leaders start thinking about deploying this technology and transforming their supply chain under the context of a technology that's changing super fast? new models are coming out, new technology, and it seems like we're now hearing about MCP servers and we're hearing about agent to agent protocols. So, how are you thinking about maintaining that edge with all of this technology changing? And what advice would you have for leaders that are making decisions right now?
Yeah, 100%. I would say you really need to optimize for speed and flexibility at the end of the day. And both of those are important, right? So on the flexibility side, if you go all in and, tie yourself to the latest OpenAI model, well, that is a recipe for a disaster because we've also seen this today ourselves. Not all the models are made equal, and they're each actually good at different parts of the job, right? So, for example, we've done some of our own internal benchmarks, and what we've seen are things like OpenAI models are really good at tabular data extraction when you have very long tables, but if you're trying to do really long context reasoning over 30-page documents, that's where Claude models really excel. But then you might have other use cases where actually the most important thing is cost and latency, and you need those to be as small as possible. And then maybe you want to use an open source model for those. And I'd actually say that our most successful customers, they don't use just one model. They actually use multiple models, figuring out the best one for their job at every part of their pipeline. And I think if you don't build with that flexibility in mind, you're going to get left behind. And the second part is the speed at which you can go live. It makes all the difference because if your implementation is going to take you 6 months to get up and running, well, by the time you ship that out, it's already no longer state of the art, right? And so both of those things are things that we really try to lean into with our product, which is how do we get people up and running in days or weeks so that you can already start to get something deployed. And at the end of the day, the only way to really learn is by getting real data flowing through your system, and that's how you can start to improve. You need that baseline, and then making it flexible, right? So we integrate with every single model I just named and 10 more that you probably haven't heard of under the sun. And we give our customers all the flexibility they need. So if a new model does come out in the future, you don't need to go rebuild your entire stack from scratch, which would be disastrous, right? And so I would say speed and flexibility are the name of the game right now.
I love that. Speed and flexibility. Let's move on to the last section. What's your most unconventional or contrarian view on AI in documents or supply chain?
Yeah, I think this is maybe a take about not just supply chain or documents specifically, but about AI as a whole, where there's a lot of, and depending on who you are, this is either contrarian or this is like the most straightforward thing you've ever heard. Um, a lot of people worry about, we've seen these models get exponentially better, right? Like if we just extrapolate this over the next 5 years, what does the world look like, right? Like, does anyone still have a job, or are we all living on a island with universal basic income and no one has to work again? And I think one of the things that people often miss about this is intelligence is a statistical process, and that's where the root cause of everything kind of comes from, where if you look at humans, right, humans are a form of generalized intelligence, and over time humans actually end up using more software, not less. And the reason for that is because intelligence is probabilistic, software is the only way you can remove uncertainty and build in guardrails. And that's how you unlock scale. And that's why over time, we just build more and more software as a society. That's actually not going to change with LLMs, right? LLMs are also probabilistic. They're also intelligence, and they're really intelligent, yeah. But trying to do any sort of very large scale automation that requires a lot of certainty and reliability, you don't really do that by adding more statistics and probability to the mix. You do that by reducing uncertainty. And the only way you can do that is by software as well. So I actually think software is here to stay. And, depending on who you are, counterintuitively, I think this will lead to more software over time, not less. And AI is not just going to take over everything.
I agree with this take. The only thing I would add though is AI is already producing so much software already that it
Yeah.
will just exponentially increase the speed at which we're able to get to those results that you were saying. So I think
Yeah.
that's super exciting as well. All right, Kushal, thank you so much for your time. Any final word you want to share with the audience? Anything else you want to share on Extend?
I think, of all the industries we've worked in, supply chain is probably the most fascinating to me personally, just because it's something I didn't know too much about going into it. But I'll say that the documents that you guys have are probably some of the most complex in the world, which is also very exciting for us. And we've seen some really complex documents, right? And so, if there's any advice, anything that we could help with, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find my email online or just go to extend. We'd be happy to help in and jump out.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Kushal. And also, congrats on the big raise of your Series A.
Thank
So,
you so
thank you
much.
so much for sharing your time with us. I know you're super busy.
Thanks for having us.